Friday. This is our Governance and Coordination Action Team meeting, and we have a nice agenda today, as always. So we're going to go over kind of the background of how we got here as a flood task force and talk about a little bit of what we've done so far. We'll have an update on selected action plans. We'll talk about a number of things that are listed here on the agenda: funding for the task force, improvements to the drainage committee process, installing a network of stream gauges, and the Peace Street levee closure responsibilities. Then we'll talk about the remaining action plan status, which we will green light and red light items that we've been discussing over time in the action plan meetings. And then we'll close out our meetings with some next steps and a little bit of homework. So with that, go to the next slide, please. So how we got here, the task force was established by the city administrator in September of 2021. This task force reports to the Deputy Mayor of Operations and Infrastructure, Lucinda Babers. We have two co-chairs, Mr. David Gaddis from DC Water, he's the CEO, and Mr. Tommy Wells, the Director of DOEE. We had our first kickoff meeting in November of 2021, and all the proceedings, everything that we do with the task force is open to the public. We have all of our meeting minutes, updates, any kind of resource for this committee, and future meeting notices are available on the Flood Task Force website, which is dcfloodtaskforce.org, all one word, dcfloodtaskforce.org. So our schedule is pretty busy, and we've been doing this for several months now. Our full task force meetings are held every other month on the third Wednesday. Our next full task force meeting will be on Wednesday, September 21st. Our action team meetings meet every month. We have two action teams. The residential resilience is on the second Tuesday of the month, and this governance and coordination meeting is on the second Friday of every month. Our flood task force final report is due. We're changing this date, but we've extended it by a few months, and so that will be updated in our next meeting. We have action plans that we are going through, and each one of them have 9 categories, and we will have a plan for them. Our post final report, after the final report is submitted, we will have an annual meeting to track the progress of each of the action plans, and we'll continue to discuss the budget and action plan priorities. So, like I mentioned, we do have 2 action teams with 9 categories. The first action team is residential resilience. We cover categories 1 through 4, and that next meeting will be September 13th. And this governance and coordination meeting covers categories 5 through 9. With that, I'd like to bring in Barbara Mitchell from DC Water to talk about, I believe it's Barbara, I'm sorry. Adria, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just wanted to double check. Barbara Mitchell from DC Water, she'll join us and update us on selected action plans. Barbara?
Hello, everyone. I think the irony of hopping off of a call to talk about flooding to hop onto another call to talk about funding for flooding is very interesting, and it's not lost upon me. So the last time we chatted, we talked about the different sources of funding, and I will not bore you by talking about them in depth again, but I'm only bringing this back to your attention so that you recognize that we will be asking formally your opinion on how we can best prioritize these funding types. I would like to say that I thought the last conversation we had together was robust, that it was necessary, and that we heard that this is not going to be a one size fits all, that it'll definitely be a layered approach. So with that, just wanted to let you know that there will be a survey coming your way to ask that you provide your feedback on the prioritization that the task force should kind of put forth. And so what that looks like is it's not going to be pick A through F or A through G or, you know, these specific options. It will be putting or placing these different funding types in order. And we'll see what gets the top 3, the top 5, and then we'll have conversations about how we can put it into the task force report and how it should be presented, you know, when we're showing our findings and approaching what we think is necessary when we, kind of go to our respective corners and start to create our different budget processes. So we can skip through. I just want to make sure that folks are able to look at the different funding types and a little blurbs about them. If we can go to the next slide. You guys remember our appropriations, rainy days. Those were the significant considerations that we talked about. Just want to make sure you guys kind of skim through that and remember those. We can go to the next slide. Bonds. That's hot, a lot of money. Again, yep. No. Just keep going. That's fine. Public-private partnership. Next. Tax increment funding and PACE. Thank you, Mr. Bernardino. Again, next. Yep, environmental degradation tax. Reforming infrastructure financing. Stormwater infrastructure fee. Private philanthropy and grants. And if you all would like this piece of the presentation, just go ahead and let us know if you, just need to refer back to the notes. But otherwise, these are the different funding options that we're going to put to the group and ask for you all to provide your feedback on which one should be put at our top of our list as priorities for funding once we present our report. Are there any questions?
Hey, Barbara, I just want to
These
clarify.
in the past meeting notes that at the website?
They should be, yes.
Okay.
I know that it's much more than what you see here though, sir. Just making sure that, there's not a
Yeah,
higher.
no, just these slides, yeah. Mhm.
Yep.
Okay,
Mhm.
thanks.
Go ahead, Meredith.
Yeah, we were talking about doing the survey so that people could rank like their top choice, their second, third, fourth, and so on. Just want to clarify that's what we're going to be asking people to do, right?
Okay, yep. I thought I had said that, but thank you for bringing that
Okay.
home. It is for ranking purposes so that we can understand which ones are the top priority. I think the point that I was making earlier is that we totally took back that it's not going to be a one size fit all and one issue or one source of funding. It will be a layered approach, and we want to know which are those top couple of options that seem like they should be, offered up as a group that would make sense for funding going forward.
And Barbara, the choice is based on feasibility to implement, right?
That's right. Thank you. So it is feasibility to implement. It is also funding the thought that what you're funding, I think folks should keep at top of the mind. So I think it's been interesting. We've been, kind of dealing publicly with the flooding event. What about short-term measures? And if you do think short-term measures are appropriate, which funding type do you think we need to highlight so that we are able to move nimbly to fund some short-term measures? But if you're kind of like, you know what, this is a larger issue, this is an infrastructure issue, and we need to be thinking more thoughtfully about that, and that's where your bread and butter lies, then I think, seeing that infrastructure financing piece might seem appealing to you. And so I think what you said, Salil, is absolutely important, but there's also what you think should be funded. And once you think about what should be funded, then you can also think about what funding type will give you the best bang for your buck.
Well put.
Thank you for that. That was like a lovely alley-oop, as they would say in basketball. Thank you, both Meredith and Salil. Are there any other questions or comments on this? All right, thank you so much.
Barbara, this is a great team, and that's what this is all about. All of us working together to figure out how we can make the city more flood resilient. And those funding sources, funding types are going to be important to making sure that we can actually implement these programs that we're talking about or these measures that we're talking about. So thank you, Barbara, for presenting that. And again, everyone, a survey will be coming your way, so look out for it. So the drainage committee updates will be done by Meredith. So Meredith Upchurch from DOE. Thank you, Meredith.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Yeah, so what I'm just going to briefly go over is how we want to develop the action plan for the Drainage Committee. We think in our fact-finding work with the key agencies who are DC Water, DDOT, DOE, and DCRA, we think there's room for improvement of processes and support from the agencies, and long-term solutions need to make an action plan. So what we're going to put into this action plan is a few things I've got listed on the slide here in our bullets. We want to establish standard processes for investigating and referring complaints. And Salil's going to have a little bit more on this in the next presentation. We want to clearly delineate agency responsibilities. Who's investigating what, ultimately what problems will belong to what agency to resolve. And just to clarify, these are generally new items that have come in. Often it's water crossing property lines, but sometimes it's from the right of way going into private property. So calls come in just all the time with new problems. So we also want to formalize the case tracking and data sharing so that we can document what's been investigated, what the sites are, what the follow-up is, who's responsible and such. We want to know what the path is for both short and long-term fixes. The short-term fixes are things that are already in place, like DC Water going out to clean a catch basin, or DDOT making a small modification to something in the street. But there are some problems that come through that take longer term fixes, and they're complicated problems. They may be costly. They may require multi-agencies. We need to have a path for those to be fixed. And maybe that's gets added into a capital improvement plan for one of the agencies. But we need to define what that path is. In some cases, it's a situation that does need to be resolved between private property owners, and we have to say that. In some cases, there may not be a solution because it's simply how nature is functioning, and we have to see what's the criticality of it and who's being affected. And we need funding resources to solve those problems, whether that's going to be put into a short-term operational plan, a longer-term capital plan. We need to identify what sort of funding might be needed. And another key thing here is to develop the resource and guidance for private property owners so they know when they do have a problem, who can they call? Is there a likely solution? Is it something they are going to be responsible for because it's something happening on their own property or something between two individual property owners? So this is these are basically the high level things we've identified that need to be done. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. And for the initial assessment, this is our draft on assignments for which agency would be responsible for taking an initial assessment. So complaints can come into all agencies. So it can be, the agency that receives the complaint can do this first assessment and see, okay, where do we know if it falls in one of these categories? Who can do that initial assessment, and then it can be determined what the next step is and what agency it needs to go to. So, are there any questions on this? This is all I have on how we're going to do the Drainage Committee action plan. Salil's going to talk about some of the information tracking and workflow next.
Hi, Meredith. This is Ramicia.
Yes.
Did we ever discuss just how you're able to activate the Drainage Committee? Is that through 311 requests? Is that
the Drainage Committee is always active? So they have had a monthly meeting. It's not regular sometimes, but the people, so basically there's a core group of agency members and representatives, and they are always basically at the ready to take a complaint. So complaints can come in through 311, they can come in through an agency email, multiple different ways.
And is there like a form or something of that nature to make sure that we're covering our angles when we get information? Because as you know, residents, they will utilize, if they utilize 311, then they may utilize their council member. They may go to their MOKers. They may even call our agency, ATSEMA. And so just having like an understanding that we're collecting the right information so that when we give it to the drainage committee, it is then adjudicated through the necessary steps.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that we're trying to fill the gap on. That information is not collected now. They may or may not be collected now. Often, usually what comes through is just an address and a general description of the problem. And in a lot of cases, that's sufficient to go and investigate. But I think that's a great example of things that we need to do to fill in.
This is Sandra. I don't know where you raise your hand on WebEx. Thanks. I mean, this committee clearly is important. I mean, the news this week has been all about pointing fingers about who on property that's flooding, particularly this flash flood over on Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that's, is this committee operational at this point that it could deal with the what's been on the news and individual properties that are being flooded like that?
Yeah, so the specific Rhode Island case is it's a place where it's been a known flooding area, and the work that's in progress with the Northeast Boundary Tunnel, has been in works for a long time to help resolve and mitigate that situation. So it's not a new problem, but it's also a very big problem, but a problem that's already has something in process. Now,
Yeah.
does there need to be more in some of these places? Yes. And
Yeah, it
that's
wasn't
where-
clear. I mean, it wasn't clear to me what was causing it. It looked like, I don't know where it was. It looked like that new Alamo draft house and the new improvements there. Maybe some of that was contributing
does
to
DC
it.
Water want to respond to this? I think it's a sewer capacity issue, right?
Right. So we'll be careful what we say here on this one. But this is, like Meredith said, this is an existing problem. Goes back hundreds of years, or however long that sewer was there. It's a very old combined sewer system that drains 800 acres. And that is the low point right there underneath the bridge. And it doesn't have the capacity. So the water comes out of the sewer, and every time it rains, it does that. Depends on how large a rainfall you have. So while it won't completely solve it, there is a connection to the Northeast Boundary Tunnel that was extended into this area, particularly to address these problems. This is not the only location. There's about 6 or 7 locations that are at risk that will be addressed with the Northeast Boundary Tunnel connection. But there's always going to be that one storm that's bigger than anything you designed gray infrastructure for.
Yeah, 3 inches in an hour is pretty high. But I just wonder from a maybe this goes back into some of the insurance or other governance pieces that have to do with this closure. Did this property owner or renter know, or had he been told that it was in a flooding area, and so anyway, it just seems like it's important for these kind of issues to be resolved, and it may be caused by more than one thing.
Yeah, and you're making lots of great points on where some gaps exist right now. This area is not in a formally mapped flood
Right.
area. It's not mapped by FEMA as a flood area, so it has no formal official designation as a flood area. It's just historically, for people who have been in the city, know that area floods. And so there was no requirement for the building owner to have any flood protection built. This was a new building. and no disclosure requirements.
Yeah.
So, but we're seeing this as, this is clearly a problem situation. We need to be getting ahead of these things, and taking care of exactly those things you mentioned.
Is this in the area where the flooding took place in 2020? It was the genesis of this group?
This same area flooded in 2020.
Yeah, so my understanding is that when the entire tunnel system is complete, it will only accommodate a 15-year storm. I think that's what it says on DC Water's website.
So you're absolutely right.
So, and it was not conceived for flood control, was it? I thought it was for CSO.
It was water quality. You are again correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Well,
go ahead, Sandra.
yeah, I was going to say, well, some communities, I mean, and this is something for DC to consider, that are going beyond the 15-year storm drainage requirement. You know, I think that was more like a 100-year precipitation event, if you can even classify them like that. So it makes me wonder if you're talking about changing governance, if you're going to look into not only changing the flood risk standard, but also changing the drainage requirements for higher level precipitation.
Yeah, so it's very complicated, and there's some
I'm
areas,
sure it is, yeah.
some areas that are highly at risk, and there's some areas that are not at risk at all. And, this is also a balance between how much water are we funneling straight into our streams and rivers and causing more problems there. So the integrated flood model, which DOE has now started to work on, we're trying to identify where are those high risk areas, and how can we manage that? So I think it's going to be more spot oriented on where we try to do those fixes.
But, and I've said this before, and at risk of repeating myself, the highest risk area in the district appears to be this area. And this area was the genesis of this task force. So I just don't want to see the good work that the task force has done get slammed in the press, because it's if you live in that community, or if you're a reporter, it's a logical question to ask, okay, the initial communication that the city administrator put out said that the genesis of this task force was the 2020 flooding. What specifically have you done to reduce the risk of flooding in the area that was the genesis of the task force? And I think we need to have a good answer for that.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, but I do want to add that there were other areas, Annie Home Burrows, Watts Branch,
But this
Ward
was the
5.
worst, right?
upper northeast.
Yeah, Ward 5 was a major one,
Yeah.
which was separate sewer area. But these are great points. Just to add a little bit to the drainage committee in terms of how we think about it, it's a strategic resolution, not tactical. So if there is an immediate problem, it needs an immediate solution because it's a life and death issue. But there are some issues that cannot be resolved immediately, in which case it would go to the drainage committee, especially those that fall between multiple jurisdictions, agencies. And it's going to be a process of collecting additional data. So to Vermicia's point, I'm not sure all the data can be collected at one point in time when the calls come in, because there will be follow-up investigations to try and understand the issue so we can work with multi-agencies to resolve it. And that's typically what drainage committee would do, right, Meredith? It's been a problem that falls between agencies, so you have to coordinate a solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is EJ. Good morning, everyone. Yes.
EJ.
So Lily, you're absolutely right. It's to resolve issues that goes across multi agencies. But to add on what has been said, I think what Meredith has pointed out as identifying what each agency is responsible for is a basic thing. if we make that thing very clear, we will have less things to deal at the committee level, because it's better to identify this and make agencies responsible than throwing it into the committee. And because it just doesn't get, the way I saw it, my experience with the committee is it doesn't get resolved very easily, because always the bottleneck is we keep on pointing fingers to one another, and we don't really know exactly what we each one of us are responsible for. That's one point. And the other thing that I want to raise in here is to what extent are we expecting the Drainage Committee to address issues? Because issues like what we experienced during the last flood, the Rhode Island kind of flood, I really don't see how the committee works on this kind of things. I think Meredith has touched on the point earlier. There are major undertakings that need to be addressed to mitigate flooding. Those are, I don't think, would be at the committee level. The committee usually gets complaints from residents, not only on such major floods, but their localized drainage issues, very localized drainage issues that we, not really flooding as such from the technical point of view, they are just drainage problems. Those drainage problems come and they go across different agencies, and we need to address them. That's where I think most of the tasks for the committee fall on. So we have to make sure that the scope of work for the committee be defined very well.
Well said, EJ. And the other point that came out of that, which speaks to what you said about pointing fingers, is we don't need to point fingers. But if there is an issue that is at a blockage, we have to find a route to escalate it quickly.
Exactly.
Because in the end, you have to find a solution.
Yes.
So
EJ, thank you for that comment. I just wanted to read two things from the chat. Victor mentioned that according to FEMA, the high risk areas are the special flood hazard zone or the 100-year area. Wards 7 and 8 have the overwhelming number of residential properties in these areas, and some of the recent floods have been significant, but still not 100-year floods. And then another comment from Josh says a 100-year flood is like what Ellicott City and Houston got a few years back. Agnes in 1972 is an example of a 100-year flood. So I do want to just mention that I think that this distinguishment in talking about what the Drainage Committee does and what this flood task force is convened to do is very significant in the sense that it's why we are convened, so that we can start to make sure we're better coordinated with all of the things that are going on in the city that touch a flood response, a flood planning, a flood, whether it be proactive or reactive. So Meredith, if you want to, kind of close out this section so we can move on to the next, that'd be great. And then we can continue with the conversation. But I do think it's important that voices be heard from the agencies about what we do in these different types of committees outside of the flood task force, because it all does have some relevancy to what we're doing on this particular task force. So thank you, EJ and others, for Misia and others for speaking up as to the significance of all that's going on in the district to make it better for the residents. Meredith?
Yeah, I just appreciate everyone's comments, and I think we are ready to transition to Salil's presentation, which will have a similar, talk about some similar things.
and it is tied to the Drainage Committee as well, in a way. So if we go to the next slide. And the concept here was, and again, some of the feedback you get out of the 2020 calls is homeowners not knowing who to call. Because if they call one agency, typically DC Water or 311, and they don't, it's not something we can help them with, they then have to call another agency. So we're trying to find a way where we can route the calls internally and not make the homeowner do multiple calls. So presently, they can go to the DC Water site. It's called Wrapper Report a Problem. Very often people just go on social media and post things as they did this week and last week. Or they can call a command center. They've called 311, and there's always those people that are connected and know people that'll call the council, mayor's office, the local ANC commissioners. So there's different ways people communicate. Next slide. So we're trying to capture this information. So right now, a person could call 311 or they could call DC Water. We have our public affairs staff that monitor the social media, called the MOMAC. They feed them information up to the command center based on what they see in social media. The command center logs them as incidents and creates investigation work orders. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. You might have 10 or 12 calls to one problem. So the work order defines a problem. Incident is a call. So once the work order, investigation work order is issued, a crew sent out to investigate. They update the resident in the field if there's a resident's name. If it's can be resolved in the field, they will resolve it. If the crew cannot resolve in the field, they will put in another work order for because it's going to take a longer time to get it resolved. And they close the loop with the command center. So the command center has that information. If the resident was not contacted in the field and they call back, they have that information available for them. Now, if after investigation they find out it does not belong to DC Water, then the command center typically asks them to call a different agency. That's the current process. We go on to the next slide. EJ, I saw your light up.
No, not go ahead. I'm
Okay.
listening.
So what happened in the 2020 flooding is we had 5 people in the command center, and the floods came in quickly, flooded the homes, and the number of calls coming in overwhelmed what even the 5 people couldn't handle. So we need a way for the calls to automatically escalate. So we're working with 311 so that there will be an overflow of calls from DC Water. If based on certain criteria, that'll be time of day. If the call's been sitting in the queue for X amount of seconds, it would bounce to 311. So that's a piece to address it so that callers aren't just left in a limbo. We're also expanding report a problem and simplifying it so that 311 can fill that out. It eventually does come back to the command center so that we can issue incidents and work orders. And the other big change here is if our investigation team determines it's not a DC Water issue, is to not have the individual contacted to have them make the call, but the command center then forward that information over to one of the agencies. In a further discussion with Meredith, and Meredith, feel free to jump in if I get this incorrect. That's the point where that may go just to the drainage committee. Because if it was a tactical issue, the investigation team would have solved it. But if it turns out to be my backyard's flooded because water's coming off the street, it would go to the drainage committee because there's nothing you can do immediately to resolve that. EJ, you want to jump in now? Or Meredith?
I think that is correct. Well, in most of the cases when such complaints are coming to DDAT from different angles, as you said, sometimes we get it from 311, sometimes we get it from our DC Water partners, And sometimes the calls just come directly either to my phones or any one of the people that I work with. And as you said, if issue is like water is surface water is coming from the roadway into private property and the like, we try to address those because we feel it's our responsibility to contain the storm water generated in the public space to be contained within public space and not flowing into other properties. But still there are some complications. Things get a little bit complicated at times. For those cases, yes, we would want to push this into the committee so that there's still, this committee is still functioning, though it's not getting together to meet. Like when we have issues that we see flow between properties or flow coming from, we consider the public spaces also as another property. So from private to public space, we contact the DCRA. DCRA does go out and help us in many of the cases, but there are certain cases that are always remaining to be a problem, which need, again, knowing who is responsible for what. But I agree with your presentation, and it's a very good one. I just took a screen capture of what you're showing, Salil, now, because we need to develop within DDAT as well something that would look like this, because we get direct complaints coming direct to us, and we keep on sending it to whoever we think is responsible, but we don't have a centralized way of doing it the way you're planning to. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for your comments. And you just pointed out the key point here, which is DDOT does it, a DCRA does it, but it's not something that can be resolved immediately. It needs some investigation. It might need design. It might need anything. So that we have to separate the tactical response from the strategic response, which takes some investigation. So it's very simple. Like there's a catch basin that's clogged, or somebody left a gutter buddy in place. That's a very easy solution. So the team that's going out to investigate would take care of that. They would not pass that on. Right? Are there any other comments?
One comment. I know that it sounds like it's gonna be more efficient for these calls to go directly, for the calls that already go to DC Water, for them to go directly to DC Water. I wonder though, in terms of like marketing, marketing is not quite the right word, but when we want to make it known to people that they can call a number and put in a flood complaint, it feels like 311 is the number that we should market. But maybe you dial 311 and you say you have a flood complaint, and then that directly transfers you to the DC Water Command Center. And if you wait too long at Command Center, then it'll switch you back to an operator at 311. I'm just trying to think of, as we're trying to message, like in social media during a flood or right before, if there's a flood warning, it's like, hey, there's this number that you should call so that you can get help quickly. So just one idea, but it's something we should think through as we're trying to figure out this flow chart.
Nick, I was thinking like what you're saying is that there's like a prompt. So as soon as you dial 311, you press 1 for flood, and then it automatically takes you to DC Water's command center. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah.
311? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there already is kind of a prompting system. But I think to me, there's a disconnect between there's a DC Water Command Center number that I guess apparently some people know and use. But I think if I was if I was trying to put a social media post telling people where to call, I'd rather put 311 and, you know, direct transfer it to DC Water if that's how we want to do it. So just something to think about.
Another thing about that though is if we think about it as a utility, when power is out, people are directed to call Pepco. As a resident, I will most likely want, if it's something where I deem it's a concern or a matter of DC Water's response, we do want them to call report a problem because it's a faster turnaround.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess the part that makes this tricky though is a resident sees water. It might be DC Water's problem. It might be DDOT's problem. It might be someone else's problem. And so I don't think we can ever expect the residents to figure that out before we call. So whatever number we put, we're going to get calls that aren't relevant to that agency. So we just need to have a way to, we just need to recognize that we're going to use one number and that number is going to get all of the calls and then we'll have to route them from there.
So remember, we get calls on flooding even when there's no rain.
Yeah.
So you want to be careful how we do this. And all right, so just since we're one team, I'll share this information. When we started down this path, we were working with 311 and our team at the command center to see if we can triage the calls so we can correctly identify where the water is coming from. Is it internal? Is it external? And what we find is when people call in an emergency, they're not very coherent and they don't want to stay on the phone for a long time and explain things. So we decided to drop that because it wasn't working out and just take the call. There's a problem. They'll give us the address. We'll send an investigation team. Let the investigation team spend the time because they understand the issues to determine what the problem is exactly. Is it inside the house? Is it outside the house? Is it a sewer system? Is it groundwater? Where is the problem? So we want to make this as fast as possible. The other thing our IT department is working on is and they're working with the University of Maryland on this, is creating a very easy to use app on the phone. I think that days of using dialing a full number and talking to people are still going to be there. It's just going to be fewer people using it. We capture a lot of the complaints coming right off the social media. People just take pictures and post it on their social media, and that's how we pick it up. It's not even an individual calling in.
Yeah.
So
what do you do? So what do you do with them? You drop them into like
so we create an incident. We send
you
it
create
to
an
the
incident
command
just from the
So it comes in different ways, and we just have to adapt to it because the days of just picking up the phone and dialing a number is disappearing.
Yeah, I don't ever want to call somebody. If you can give me I can do it on a website, that's what I'll do. But I know not everybody's like that.
No, and we got to accommodate all different means of communicating.
Yeah.
So this is still work in progress, and I'm really, if there's any other comments, please feel free now or later. Love to hear from you.
Hi, this is Steve Dudek from OPC. Because just as DC Water does, we do get consumers calling about flood and catch basins all the time to us. So should we report them to the DC Water Command Center, or should we follow our own protocols that we have with DC Water in that sense? Because I don't want the consumer to be sort of lost in what we're trying to do versus what you guys are trying to do. And then the second question is, do you guys decipher sort of what type of calls? Because sometimes we get calls that the basement is flooded. Sometimes it's response to damage of flooding. So the emergency has already dissipated. Does the command center differentiate between those calls at all?
I would have to follow up with the command center. I don't believe they do, Steve. But my guess is the calls going to the OPC may not be the original calls.
Mhm.
But if we've done investigation and we have determined that either we cannot resolve it, or if it's a private property issue that they need to resolve it, or it's a issue that needs to go to the drainage committee that's going to take a while to resolve, folks may be getting frustrated and just calling OPC. And I don't blame them. It's just they're trying to find a solution quickly.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not there.
Yeah.
You feel free to call the command center, or I would suggest, like Vermees said, just go to your report a problem on a website and fill it in
Mhm.
and report it as a reported problem through OPC. And so we can track it and close the loop with you.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And the last question I have is there any proactive measures, especially we get a lot of calls about catch basins being clogged and flooded. Is there any proactive measures of doing seasonal cleanings of the catch basins, or at least the catch basins in the high prone areas that are at risk of flooding?
Answer is yes. So the catch basins are cleaned at least once a year. Some are cleaned twice a year, and that's in our permit with DOE. But in addition to that, and we've got an SOP in place that we made sure everyone gets trained on after the September 10th storm, which identifies high-risk areas where we go through and check, make sure the catch basins are clear if we know there's a storm coming. Sometimes you get a flash flood and you have no idea. But we do that in areas that have known flooding risks. So that's already done. What we don't have a handle on, and we can't get a handle on, is developers and private construction that are upgrading buildings are required to put gutter buddies to prevent material from entering the MS4 area. When it rains, they don't pick up those gutter buddies, and that creates a problem.
Of course.
So this is not the entirety of the problem. This is a subset of the problem. But very often when our team responds to a flooding issue, they find that a gutter buddy is blocking it, and they just remove those. But so I don't know what the solution is, how you can make a developer remove all his gutter buddies prior to the storm, because the storm's just going to wash all the material into the creek. But
Yeah,
maintenance
yeah.
of that area is important.
Of course. No, thank you.
Oh.
And do you think it would be helpful for the public to know if say they could find it on your website, if the last time that their catch basin near their home has been cleaned, to help monitor the situation for you guys, especially in the fall and the change of season, if they see any clutter or garbage that may cause a problem with a future storm?
That's a good idea. I think a public service message on checking your neighborhood catch basins, just as you take a walk, look to see if there's anything clogging it. It actually goes along with being able to put a 5 or 10 cent tax on bottles and cans so that people have incentive to pick them up. Would be great.
Yeah. Well, we can
Or
talk
just-
offline and be able to help you guys with that messaging as well.
So I'm going to jump in here so we can keep going. I just want to just state that this is what progress looks like, and this is why this flood task force exists. I think this is one of the more productive conversations we've had, and I really hate to be the person that stops it, but I want to make sure that we get the rest of our agenda items in. So thank you everyone for participating and asking questions and giving comments. And there's a lot of offline conversation, it sounds like. So thank you. Nick, I think that you're going to talk about now some of the stream. No, is it Nick or is it? Yes, it's Nick is going to be talking about the Stream Gauge network. Thank you, Nick.
I think it's Salil. I hope it's Salil.
It is,
Okay, I'm
Lisa.
sorry. That's why I was like, wait a minute, stream gauge doesn't look like it's Nick, but Salil, is it you? I'm sorry, that's my fault. I
No, no
just didn't
fault
have
at
this
all.
note on my,
We're one team. We can tag team on this one.
great. I skipped ahead. Sorry. It's up to you now.
All right. So some of you may have already seen this, so forgive me if you have. But there's three distinct periods on a major storm: the advance, during the storm, and then this post-storm. And Varmisi, I'm going to count on you to jump in here also. A lot of the response post-storm is something HCMA does and does really well. Advance of the storm is what we can do to prepare us, like Stephen was talking about, is making sure the catch basins are clear. We haven't talked about notifying people yet, but that's going to be talked about. And then during the storm, that's not something you would dispatch people for unless somebody was in trouble, in which case that would be FEMS, Fire Emergency Management Services, would be the ones responding during the storm. But if you do the work before the storm and you prepare stuff, hopefully the during the storm rescues are not as frequent. So there's three different periods. Next slide. So advanced flood notification applications.
Well, a comment on the previous.
AJ, go ahead.
I have a comment on the previous. Yes, this is exactly the way I understand it as well. But where do we see, because like an agency like DC Water is very well organized, and basically this is the area there that you guys are focused on. But for agencies like ours, you know, our main task is around, you know, roadways. Yes, drainage is an issue on roadways. Flooding, responding to flooding is something that we are, as an agency, is what I'm talking about. We're getting pushed into. Of course, it is a shared responsibility, and we do accept that. But capacity building, where do we see capacity building in here? Because especially on the advance and during storm is a capacity issue. Do the agencies have, each one of the agencies have the capacity? Where do we assess ourselves in terms of capacity building?
That's a good question. I'm going to put it out to the rest of the group, see if anybody has an opinion on that. That's a great question, EJ. Silence. Okay.
Maybe EJ, if you restate the question, because maybe people were thinking that Salil was going to just answer it. So EJ, could you restate the question, please?
Well, the question is, most of us, most of the other the agencies here, are not really geared. Their responsibilities and objectives are not really geared towards flood protection kind of work. But this is something that we all have to do. We are realizing that we all have to get involved in this and help out. So, like in the case of DDAT, we have very limited resources to address this kind of things. The advanced preparation thing, that's a lot of thing that needs resources. So the capacity within DDAT would need to be established, would need to be moved on. A similar case maybe in other agencies, I don't know. I know DOE is building up quite a lot, quite a bit on the flood management works these days. So where are we with this capacity building, and where do we see this? Put these three major categories, but where is the capacity building? Because without the capacity, we just can't do any of this.
Salil, is the thought
board advance notice? And I don't see our response teams on the call today, but are you referring to how do we notify flood warning through the National Weather Services and how that information is then shared with partners to then take response measures? Or you're speaking more advanced than that?
Looking at the weather patterns, looking at whether weather's going to fall, looking at rain gauges in the area, not just in DC. By the time you see the rain gauge, you're during the storm, but there's ways to see the rain gauges change in neighboring areas, and that gets plugged into the National Weather Service.
Mhm.
So it's all of the above, including looking at creek levels. How are they rising? Where are they rising? Then EJ, to answer your question, I'll jump in since nobody was talking about it. It's not just building capacity for the sake of building capacity. It's easier and more effective to identify the subset of problems that need to be handled that could appear, and then build capacity for those. There's always going to be those that we miss, but if we identify, for example, in this big storm that we had this week, right? I was driving on 295, but I caught on the radio that the 3rd Street tunnel had flooded. Now, the last time it flooded, you and I were there, but that's because there was a pipe break.
Right.
This one flooded because we just had so much water
Overwhelmed.
pouring into
Yeah.
it, right? So when a water like that happens, it's just, I'd love to talk to you about how you handled it, but it's great to bring in large pumps to pump it out.
Mhm.
So do we create as a multi-agency group a contract with Xylem, for example? Xylem bought the company that has these big water pumps, right? So that they're on standby for us to use them. So if there's a storm coming, we can activate that contract and maybe move a couple of them over to where we know that it's going to flood. So that's the kind of advance, but it requires all of us to
Yes.
talk, identify areas we know these problems, come up with different solutions, and then that's what I was getting at. And so that helps with the capacity building part.
Thank you, sir. That was exactly where I was heading at. Thank you.
No.
I think we also should be thinking, you know, many of our agencies are operational agencies. DC Water, DDOT, DOE, DCRA, you know, there are staff that have to respond when things happen. And so I know DDOT in the past has done a lot of inspections and checking of flooded areas when a flood is expected or heavy rainstorm is expected. So I think collectively as a group, we can identify, prioritize, you know, what needs to be done in certain areas to make sure they're good to go ahead of time, what needs real-time monitoring. The flood sensors that HCEMA is working on, you know, these are the kinds of things that we're trying to put in place as this larger group to help the effort. So I think thinking more about what is it that's needed and prioritizing the areas are what we have to do.
And I'll add that HCEMA, like our mission is right to be a coordinating agency. So if there is areas where we need to be coordinating better, like we just please let us know, and we have the staff and that it is our essential role. And what I'm hearing from this conversation is that we need to also collectively be better about sort of after action reviews of what is coming in, or periodic reviews of all of the data that is coming in through the various notification systems that we're deploying, and doing some systematic questioning of, is there something that is a project that we're going to fund through hazard mitigation dollars? Is something just a maintenance issue? Like if we can start categorizing things into those different buckets, then we can be more strategic about finding longer term solutions.
And Melissa, stealing a page from your playbook there. You guys have some really good plans on how to react depending on the type of emergencies. Already prepared so that you can just execute them. I was really impressed when I saw those. It'd be great to do similar plans on the front end on potential of where we've seen these problems and what kind of resources you would need if those problems occur. EJ and I just talked about 3rd Street Tunnel filling up with water because of the storm. We can talk about what happened on Rhode Island Avenue. We can talk about other places. It may not be a problem we can do anything about to prevent, but we can talk about how do we set up in advance to address it because we know it's coming. Potential of it coming. And it's definitely a multi-agency discussion. So thank you all. So these are some of the options we have for notifications of flooding. Surface flooding, open swales, that's the one that scares me the most. I don't think there's a lot of those in DC, but those fill up very quickly and kids love to play in water. And they can sweep kids away very quickly. Not sure we have a lot of those in DC, thank goodness. Underpasses, streets. Next slide. So where does the data come from? Weather service maps, we can advance the mapping. Nick talked about the integrated flood model. When it's finished, it gives a good idea of what areas of the city have the most risk. That's going to be a huge benefit to us. HydroForecast is a tool that is not used. They can do predictive stream flows. Based on how much rain is going to fall, they can tell you when and how much the stream is going to go up. Then rain gauges. It'd be nice to have more rain gauges across the city because we're seeing storms that are very localized. So a rain gauge that we have at Bryant Street doesn't work for what happened on Rhode Island Avenue necessarily. So it's good to have more rain gauges across the city. We already talked about the IFM and the hydroforecasting. And then comes the sensors. Sensors to me is a very easy, relatively inexpensive way to have our eyes on what's happening in the city. Next slide. So if we know an area is going to flood, either through experience or after the integrated flood model shows us what area is a problem, you can have, we know where to put the sensors. Creek bank sensors, we could tell you an advanced warning of the creeks rising, especially like Watts Branch that can flood the neighborhoods in Oxon Run. It's great to know that. Storm drain sensors, surprisingly, those are storm and sewer drain sensors actually go inside a manhole. And it's a hydrostatic sensor. It's also a ultrasonic built into it. And it tells you when that level is coming up. At some point when it comes up, it's going to go on the street. But it gives you advanced warning. Cameras, but camera will report after the fact, but there's intelligence that gets built into the cameras. Then there's always the calls and the social media. So those are detection options. Next slide. Then how do you notify people? You can have an alert system that goes out. You get robocalls to phones, geofencing, social media. So there's different ways to get out the notification that there's a problem. Next slide. So I keep saying there's many components to a technology, but you can work through every one of those. Technology is not the issue. And a lot of this gets now packaged into a sensor. So you can buy an off-the-shelf sensor for $1,700 or something really more fancy like the one that Montgomery County installed, which is $3,400, and install them all over the place. The issue that's, to me personally, is the hardest is the governance part. How do we talk who provides the budget, not only to buy it, you have to have a budget to maintain it, staff to maintain it. That's the part that has to be worked out. And that's where, as a team, we need to talk about who's going to do what, and then how do we get assigned the budgets for that. The next slide. I think that's the last slide. Great. So any thoughts would be welcome here.
Actually, Salil, I'm sorry to say, but we do need to move ahead. What we should do is probably pick this up in our next meeting, like maybe have a little bit more of time to let people think about it. The slides will obviously be on the website so that we can all kind of look at it, come with some ideas, and then put it on the agenda for the next meeting, if that's okay with you, Salil.
It is, and Monty, thank you for keeping us on track.
Sorry, yeah, we just had a full agenda and we maybe underestimated how important it was to dig into all of these smaller pieces. So let's move on. Nick, you're up next this time for sure with the P Street levee closure. And
Sure.
Nick, unfortunately, I think that you have to shorten your time so that we can get to the red light, green light section.
Yeah, everybody
Thank you.
loves playing red light, green light.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, it's very effective on 3 and 4-year-olds from personal experience. So I'll actually go back one slide to the P Street closure. So this is just a quick update, just to let everyone know that we've started conversations with agencies, and folks may not know, but so we've got this great 17th Street levee closure on the National Mall, but there's another part of it all the way down in Southwest. So this is on 2nd Street. You're looking north. That street that you see, the intersection is P Street there. So we actually need to have a sandbag closure if we get a warning that the river will be really high. So we need to have an agency to do that. Right now, we don't. So that's why it's important that we figure it out. And if you go to the next slide, we are coordinating with the Army Corps of Engineers who are kind of helping us understand what exactly, how high we need to have this, what are maybe some options besides sandbags that we can use. And then also working with DDOT, DPW, HSEMA, and we need to get in touch with the Fire and Emergency Management because they may have a role to play here too. Oh, and I forgot to add DGS because they may help us with purchasing or storing some of these materials. So, and what you see on the map here is that in the blue box and then a little red dot, that's where that closure is. And if you don't have that closure when the water is really high, then all of the area in yellow can be flooded. So that's just an update on that. There will be an action plan where we will describe that coordination and as far as we can get between now and September. Next slide. All right, so now we're gonna shift to just talking about the remaining action plans that we have left. And just as a reminder to everyone on the call, what we heard from Director Wells was that we want everything to be presented. Anything that the task force wants to do needs to be presented by September. Doesn't mean it has to be approved by September. It can be approved, as each action plan goes through the agency comment and the public comment process. But everything needs to be out there in September so that when the district agencies start doing their budget preparation for FY24, which is around the September-October timeframe, that we'll be able to incorporate what we know we want to do into that process. So as a recap, right now we've got all of these action plans out for public comment. The ones that are highlighted in blue are coming from this governance and coordination team. So I'm highlighting here their public comment, right? So you guys have already had a chance to comment on this. They got approved by the task force in July, and now we're receiving public comment on these. If you go to the next slide, so these are the ones that were presented for the first time in July and are now for agency comment through August 22nd. So you guys should all have this in your emails. There's links to the Word documents. And right, so once you comment on these, the owners of these plans will then go back and adjust, and then in the September meeting, the task force will vote on as a block on whether they want to approve these. And if they approve these, then they'll go to public comment. So, so that's as far, that's all the action plans that we've done to date. So now we have to discuss like which are the ones remaining that we're going to present in September. And then there might be a few that we don't want to present. So, so ones that we for sure have a green light on already. These are the ones that are listed below. So these are the ones that so the first one, 6.6, we've definitely made a decision at some point that we want to present this. So we're going to do this in September for sure. We haven't been explicit for these other ones, 7.1 through 9.2, that we want to present in September. But since they are greenlit, this is a heads up to DOE, that's our agency, and then also HCMA that we're expecting these to be presented in September.
Nick,
Go ahead.
is the flood model not fully funded currently?
So it is, that's a good question. No, it is funded. I'm blank. I think 5.7 million is what was budgeted and what we have. But in all of the materials that we received during the contracting process, made it clear that if we want to do that we might need more money to do it than we originally budgeted. And I think specifically what will, if we don't get extra money, what we'll lose out on is the ability to create what we're calling floodshed management plans for multiple neighborhoods. We budgeted enough for like, 3 or 4 neighborhoods, but if we do a map and we see like 10 or 15 neighborhoods that need to be, that we want to have plans for how to fix it, how to create infrastructure, we're going to need more money to put into the contract to do that. So we're just trying to think ahead. We have like we're hit the ground running. We're working on it. We have enough money to keep continuing, but we're just looking ahead and thinking that we probably need some more money at the end of this.
Just so I understand, is the intent to model the entire district, or are there some areas that, for instance, because of their elevation, you wouldn't do just because they're too high up and flooding's not an issue? And how is it supposed to work?
Yeah, it's the short answer is like, yeah, we're kind of doing both. So one is, you're initially doing a whole model of the city at probably like a more coarse level, because you need to have all of the pipes connected and all the topography of the entire district, because even the places that are higher are sending rainwater somewhere, so we need to kind of like have it all figured out. But then based on this kind of course model and also kind of what we know already about areas that flooded, there'll be kind of additional detailed modeling of those areas. And then where we're really concerned about, we'll go even further and maybe even start measuring like the height of the curb, how tall the inlet is for the catch basin, where we need to get really specific. So it's not every part of the district will receive the like very detailed modeling. It'll be just kind of based on like the initial analysis.
I just wanted to add, I'm sorry, we didn't pick this up earlier, but Sandra added in the chat, and it's relevant to this slide, which is pluvial or rainfall flooding could be identified on DC's updated flood maps, even though insurance is not required. This would at least help potential renters, buyers with some information to base their decision on. So just wanted to make sure that was captured.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. And I think we're going to try and, yeah, I think that's something we should definitely do once we have those maps. Okay, so I think we go to the next slide, because these are all things that we've kind of already agreed on. And so this slide, this is, I think we just need Now I'm going to ask basically like if you disagree, if you don't think any one of these plans should go forward and be made into an action plan, you should let us know. But essentially, you know, we've had conversations on district and federal collaboration. You know, I think DOE will work on this action plan with Julia Coster from NCPC. You just heard a little bit about the network of stream gauges. You know, this one, we won't be able to have an action plan saying like, this is exactly what we're going to do and how, but we'll, you know, we'll put something out there about the next steps for this. 7.6, the clearinghouse access to flood models. I think, and we've talked, I think just briefly about that, but essentially, you know, for the integrated flood model, we're pulling together all of the models that have been done in DC recently. And so I think finding a way to make those publicly accessible, if they're not sensitive, that we'd like to do that so that nobody's having to pay for like extra work, or that they're just easy to find instead of having to email around and ask who's got the latest model. So 8.3, this one is, this is basically kind of like the P Street levee closure. I think through our conversations, we've identified that this is the primary thing that we need to figure out for flood risk infrastructure. So I think that's gonna, that's got kind of its own action plan. And then 9.4, a centralized system for flood complaints, which is also a little bit related to the drainage committee. We talked about that today. I think it's clear that we need an action plan, and just like some of these other ones, we're not going to be able to have, you know, figure out exactly in the action plan. We're not going to say exactly how it's going to be done because we haven't figured it out yet, but we're at least going to put down a schedule and you know, how we're going to coordinate going forward. So I haven't heard anyone or anyone in the chat saying that they don't think these should go forward. So so we keep pushing as if they are. And then, you know, I think we haven't put any agencies on these. So I guess after this meeting, we'll send out some emails to agencies that may be responsible for putting these action plans together. I think DOE is certainly on this list, and DC Water too. All right, and then the last two, which we're saying, so these are items that we put forth really early on when we created a spreadsheet and just listed, you know, kind of brainstorm a bunch of ideas. I think both of these are kind of like outputs of the integrated flood model, and they're just a little bit too far in the future to, I think, meaningfully construct an action plan. So our recommendation is, you know, to red light these, and you know, we won't write an action plan for these two. But I'll note that, you know, Sandra's suggestion is pretty closely aligned with 6.4. You know, Sandra wasn't suggesting that we update regulations, but at least that we make the maps publicly available, which I think is a good step. All right. Well, so that sounds good to everybody. And I think we've got our work cut out for us. We know which action plans we're going to do, which ones we aren't going to do. And again, there's going to be a lot of plans presented in September. So I guess heads up, it could be a longer meeting.
So Nick, thank you so much. You definitely a great closer. You caught us up in time. We've gone through a lot of things. So let's just talk about the homework. And usually Meredith is the bearer of all assignments. So Meredith, would you share and go over the homework with us, and then we can get ready to close out. Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
So I'm gonna do this, or Nick gonna do?
Yeah, I can do this one. Yeah, so just to remind everybody, in your inboxes, in the task force members' inboxes, you've got the action plans that were presented in July. And so please provide comments, ideally with track changes or like little the comment things on the OneDrive documents, or if you want, you can just send an email to DC Flood Task Force at dc.gov. So do that by August 22nd. So we need the comments on the old ones, and then I think so you just saw us run through what needs to be presented in September. So if there's an action plan that your agency is responsible for, then you should start working on that. And just to highlight the expectations here, we are expecting that you do like a 3 or 4 slide presentation at the task force meeting explaining what that action is. And then right after the task force meeting, we will want to send out to all the task force members the Word document of the action plan so that they can have that 30-day comment period. So just to reiterate, what we're asking for is if your agency is responsible for an action plan, a PowerPoint, and the completed Word document, which is again a 3 to 5 page Word document. We've got a template for you. We'd like to have that before the September meeting. So as far as next steps, this is, the next task force meeting will be voting on some old ones, we'll be presenting the new ones. And then as far as our next action team meeting, we could do a little bit on local workforce. We might also pick up on the sensors, and maybe as folks are working on the action plans for September, if there's something that you all think needs a action team conversation, we can add that to the agenda too.
Great. So thank you, Nick, for that. Just a little point of privilege as a facilitator. I just want to acknowledge the fact that this has been a great process today, especially, we have the attention of directors like Jed Ross. We have all of these key players and agencies and private partners and federal partners at the table, really rolling up their sleeves. And you guys are discussing how to really make the city more flood resilient, thinking about the short-term and the long-term issues. And I'm proud in particular as a native Washingtonian to see how our city is just working and moving lock and step to make it better. So I want to say thank you for everybody participating today. We do have some meetings coming up. Again, they're virtual, so the public can easily join us. We have our next Governance and Coordination Action Team meeting on September 9th. We have our Residential Resilience Action Team meeting coming up on September 13th. And like Nick said, there's lots of things to be done before our next full task force meeting on September 21st. Nick and others from the DC Water and DOEE team put together as much information as possible to make it easy for each of you agency members to participate and do your action plan. So please look out for all of that information coming. It might be a flood of emails, but you're going to get a lot of information to help prepare you or make it easier for you to just drop right into making your action plan for all of these meetings coming up. So September is going to be busy for us, and I'm sure we'll all be ready for it. Ask questions if you need to. You've got Salil, Nick, Meredith, Opera, and Barbara at the ready to kind of keep guiding us and pushing us forward as a really tight team, shouldering a lot of this work. So we want to thank them for all the extra. Next slide, please. All right. So with that, I was all worried about the time. The team here was worried about the time, but we did it. It's 11:57. We are going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and we will we'll be seeing you very soon. And of course, there'll be a lot of email back and forth on some of the assignments that are upcoming. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.